All right, now is that time we are going to go to Philadelphia, bring in our good friend, Zach Berman. What's going on, Zach?
Doing well. It's good to see you guys. I don't typically get to prepare for an Eagles Bengals game, so
Yeah.
this has been a fun week in that regard.
It is a fun week. Zach covers the Eagles for PHLY. Of course, former colleague at the Athletic, also has a great book out. If you know anybody that's a Eagles fan and you want to give them a gift for the holidays, make sure you pick up Underdogs, the franchise. Great book by Zach. I think there it is, right behind you. See it. That's
Yeah,
the best part of having a bookshelf behind your setup is writing a book that you can put on there, man. Strong flex.
yeah, free promotion. So I
Yeah, there you
appreciate
go.
that. Yeah.
No problem. Well, you know what? I've been kind of calling the Eagles the NFC Bengals this week. There's so many similarities between these two teams, between the expectations they've had, the recent success, the receivers, the paying of all of these skill players.
Yeah.
They're very similar teams. Have you, as you've kind of dived, do you view it that way where there's kind of, man, you go through it and you start looking at these two teams and you're like, gosh, you see a lot of the same stuff here.
Yeah, well said. And like to build off it too, you look at they both lost in the Super Bowl in like real close games
Mhm.
that both teams really seem to be like chasing what they were then. And the foundations in place, Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, they were in the same draft class. You mentioned the wide receiver combinations. Now I'm fascinated in your guys' opinion on this. Like this is something that the Eagles, to their credit, they were able to take care of them both in contracts, that's not lingering. In terms of the way the teams are built, you do see those comparisons. The Bengals have far more veterans on defense than the Eagles too. But I think when you look at the skill players on offense, the young quarterbacks on big contracts coming off the Super Bowl seasons in recent years, there are a lot of similarities there.
You know, last week a big conversation around Cincinnati was the 7-game losing streak in Cleveland, and they were able to break that. The Eagles have never won in Cincinnati. I don't know how much of a conversation that's been, but just kind of with the theme of the Browns and what Paul was getting to about the way these teams are too similar. Both these teams, their last 2 games against the Giants and the Browns, both of them have found something on defense. How much of the increased success that the Eagles are having on defense do you think is them getting better versus playing weaker, playing Daniel Jones, playing Deshaun Watson?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jay, because I think it's probably the latter. They are getting better. I'll say that, but I do think playing Daniel Jones and Deshaun Watson help them look better than they might be. But they have a lot of young players. It's a new scheme with Vic Fangio, so I do think there were some growing pains early, and they have found themselves, in particular, the pass rush during these past 2 weeks, and there is talent there, and so when those guys are kind of getting more comfortable with the scheme and more comfortable with each other, I think you're seeing the benefits to that. That said, I think if they were playing, Joe Burrow every week, it wouldn't necessarily look like that.
Has Jalen Hurts settled down the last couple of weeks? There seemed like we haven't seen any turnover worthy plays from the last 2 weeks. There was a bunch of those early. Or have they asked him to do less and that's allowed him to be more efficient? What's happening with Jalen Hurts last 2 weeks?
Yeah, it's really what's been happening with Jalen Hurts the last 2 months is a big
Yeah.
question here. But no, these past 2 weeks, you hit on the head as far as they felt in the first month of the season. The turnovers were really crippling them, and so there's been an increased focus, increased emphasis, if you will, on reducing the turnovers. And so whether that is Jalen playing more conservatively or the play calling rendering more conservative, I think that's been an emphasis, but there needs to be far more efficiency and consistency from Jalen. When you have AJ Brown and you have Devontae Smith, uh, there just needs to be a more prolific passing attack than what the Eagles have had. Now that said, you guys saw what Saquon Barkley did last week against the Giants. Saquon's been like that since he got here, and there's talk certainly outside the building and a bit inside the building too about leaning on the running game because they have this strong offensive line. They have one of the best running backs in the league, and it's clearly working.
I mean, you talk about that. One of the best running backs in the league. They're getting explosives all over the place. Everybody knows what the tush push is. I think one of the most surprising stats when I look at the Eagles is only 28 third down conversions, only 34%. They're down in the bottom of the league. I mean, what's going on offensively? Why are they getting themselves in a lot of third and longs, or are they just breaking down on third down?
Yeah, so it's a combination of two things. You hit it on the head in terms of third and long. Last week they were 1 of 13 on third downs, and they were far too often in third and long. But then the other part you mentioned, tush push, brotherly shove, whatever you want to call it there. The Eagles operate when they're in third and short. They operate basically 4 down territory every time, knowing that they have that in their back pocket. So I think that does factor in to the way they call third downs in some of those situations. And just as a case in point, last week they were 0 for 3 on third and short, 3 for 3 on fourth down. So they go into those plays knowing they have 2 cracks at it. And Nick Sirianni had a comment, I think it was last year, that they start every down 1st and 9. And there is validity to that because they're so successful when they're in 4th and 1 situations. But it's hard to rely on that, and the inefficiency on third down has been problematic.
You touched on this earlier, and I have to ask you. So there's been a lot of talk here about how you can't pay 2 wide receivers in the quarterback and still have a competitive roster. How'd the Eagles do that?
It's a great point because I had my eyes on Cincinnati, to be honest with you, during the past 2 years, and watching how they navigated this. And there were a few things there. First off, they were quick to the market. And this is something that I'll give the Eagles front office and Howie Roseman credit on this in particular is they don't react, they act. So Jaylen Herz signed his deal before the other quarterbacks did. Devontae Smith signed his deal before the other wide receivers did. A.J. Brown, his is a little different because it's a third contract, but he signed his deal before some of the other wide receivers did. So they don't react to the market; they set the market. And being an early mover does have its advantage, and that's how they've really been able to do it. In Devontae's case, they had, from a contract perspective, they had the advantage of he had his there's the 5th year option there. They could potentially tag him after the 5th year option. So you go to him and you say, you're not going to hit the market for another 2 years. So we'll get you this deal now. You get this deal now. It's a number you're happy with. And otherwise, in order for you to hit the open market, you're 2 years away from that. In A.J. Brown's case, they acted quickly. They saw what was going to happen with Justin Jefferson, I imagine with Jamar Chase, and they got ahead of it. And it's to their credit. And I don't think it's an exception because they did it with Jaylen Herz. They did it with Landon Dickerson at guard. They did it with Jordan Mailata at tackle. Time and time again, they sign players to early deals because they don't wait for the market.
Have you seen the fallout from that? Is there a fallout where you've seen, okay, they've done this and now there's clearly they're going to have to make cuts or approach the roster differently because of some of these contracts that are currently here? I know Howie's kind of been, he's built this reputation as being able to work the magic and not let it affect his actual decision making. But do you see the Bills coming due on that potential?
No, to be honest with you, because there's 2 parts of this. One, the way they structure contracts is their whole thing's built around the cap rising, right? Number one, and number 2, making the bets on the right players. So where it hurts you is when you sign Carson Wentz to a deal, you trade Carson Wentz and you have to eat the money, and then you have that dead money, and you saw that with the Eagles in 2021. But if you make the right bets on the right players, then you can continue renegotiating the deal because you're not going to cut the player early, right? So the deferred money doesn't necessarily hurt you. The second part to this is there are some positions where they just won't pay or they don't pay. Linebacker being one of them. So if they had, they've had good linebackers walk out the door. They've missed on lottery ticket type signings at linebackers because it's not a position that they pay. So I think where it could potentially hurt them is if they sign a guy to a deal early and the guy either gets hurt or he's not the player that they thought. You saw that in Carson Wentz's case. and then the Bills do. But if you believe in AJ Brown and Devontae Smith and you pay them and they're good for the duration of the deal, the Bills not going to be doing it.
I mean, a ripple effect of that, and really another similarity between these two teams is when you're paying all these guys that big money, you're going to have to rely on young guys somewhere, and they're doing it in the secondary, just like the Bengals at corner. Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean. I've heard a lot of people say that starting 2 rookie corners is one of the reasons that the defense has struggled. But if you look at PFF, their numbers are actually pretty good. And if you think about it, if you have a new coordinator coming in and everybody's kind of on the same page learning a new system, maybe it's not as much of a growing pain for rookie corners. How have you seen those guys play? How much of the defensive struggles early were just on that fact that you got 2 rookie corners in there?
Yeah, so Quinyon Mitchell, I was curious how he would do, and you guys know Toledo better than I do, right? But I thought there was going to be an adjustment, and the Eagles thought that they clearly thought he was the top corner in the draft, because when they took him at 21, he was the he was the first cornerback taken, and so at the time that they take him over Terrion Arnold, who comes from Alabama, right? So you're saying there's more pedigree there. Quinyon's been outstanding for them. He's been a day one starter, and he's really stabilized a position that had too many inconsistencies last year. Cooper DeJean, he got hurt during the summer. He got hurt before training camp, missed time during training camp. I thought he was going to be a day one starter had he been healthy. The Eagles waited till after the bye to insert him in the slot, and I think there's been a noticeable difference having him in there. He's just a better player. He's a more physical, better athlete than Avonte Maddox. So having those 2 rookies has been a big part of what you've seen during these past 2 weeks. Now, that said, I don't think the problems early in the year had as much to do with the corners. I think it had more to do with the lack of a pass rush. So we were just talking about the contracts, right? The Eagles signed Hassan Reddick in free agency 2 years ago. He was outstanding for 2 years, wanted more money. The Eagles weren't willing to pay him. The Eagles traded him. And I think they missed that top edge rusher on the outside. They signed Bryce Huff. He wasn't that player for the first month of the season. And without a pass rush, I think it affected everything thereafter. Now that you're getting more success with the pass rush, I really think that the rush and coverage are married to each other much better. They understand what Fangio wants them to do. And so I think the lack of a pass rush was more of the issue during the first month of the season.
I'll get you out of here. And with this, what's the relationship like currently between the Philadelphia fans and Nick Sirianni? How are we doing? Do we have to take the temperature weekly over there now? It seems like every week it's something new and fired to back to being savior again.
Yeah, so it's more daily than weekly, to be honest with you. Look, I mean, going into the year, the stakes of this were kind of clear. Even if it wasn't explicit, it was implicit that he had to win and win I guess relatively big to keep his job. They were 10-1 last year. They collapsed. They lost in the first round in the playoffs, and he had to replace both coordinators. And there's kind of a thought here that and the owner Jeffrey Lurie said this, that Nick has all the ingredients, so he had to be successful. And there's the kind of like the knock on him sometimes is like, what exactly does he do? Because he doesn't call the plays. It's not necessarily his scheme. I think that's unfair. He coaches the team. He's in charge of the coaches, in charge of the players, in charge of game management. But you saw 2 weeks ago after the Eagles win, the fans were getting on him. He got on him back. That's not necessarily smart business sometimes to be screaming at your own fans. That's kind of Nick's personality as it is. But I will say that his approval rating isn't as high as you would think for a guy who in 3 years has had 2 double-digit win seasons, a Super Bowl appearance, and 3 playoff appearances. But that's also part of being that's also part of being coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, right? You kind of deal with that. So, I mean, I think that he needs to keep winning, and if he doesn't, the outroar, if you will, is going to be louder and louder each week.
Any gut on Sunday prediction for Sunday yet?
Yeah, so I'm leaning towards Cincinnati in this, and the reason being because I don't totally believe in what I've seen from the Eagles defense during the past 2 weeks because Deshaun Watson and Daniel Jones aren't playing especially good, and I mean I think the world of Joe Burrow, and I think that Burrow if he doesn't hold on to the ball too long is going to be able to move the ball on this Eagles defense. That said, I think the Eagles offense is better. I think the passing game is better than what they've shown. Um, Week 1, the Eagles put up, 30 plus points against Green Bay. That's the only time they put up 30 plus points. But you saw when they were healthy, they have the ability to be explosive. And so I think they're going to have more offensive output than they've had. But I trust Burrow more in this spot than I do the Eagles right now.
Zach, I certainly appreciate your time, and a reminder to everybody, if you have a Philly fan that you know in your life, Underdogs, the franchise, is out. Great Christmas gift if you're looking for something to give. And Zach, I look forward to seeing you on Sunday in the press box. We'll welcome you to Paycor. Have you ever been here before?
I have. So in 2016, so the Eagles don't play the Bengals too often, right? But 2016, Carson Wentz's rookie year, the Eagles got blown out.
Yeah.
There was a play on the sideline where I think Zach Ertz didn't block Vontez perfect, destroyed Wentz. It became a big deal in Philly thereafter. Ertz went on to catch the game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl a year later and actually cited that play as like a turning point to him. But the only, and then I remember during the COVID year, the two teams tied at the 2020. Great. And they tied back in 2010 as well?
2008. It's a remarkable
2008,
history between these two teams. The last 5 games have had 3 Bengals blowouts and 2 ties. I don't understand it other than to anticipate something weird happening when we get together on Sunday.
Yeah, I just hope there's no tie. Ties are hard to write and talk about.
Nobody wants a tie. We actually had the greatest tie, which was a tie in London, and all the fans there totally knew what to do with it and how to react. They were like, okay, we clap and we go to the pub now. And that's how it goes. And I was like, look how comfortable everybody is with this when we didn't really know quite what to do. But hopefully no ties. Nobody wants that. Zach, appreciate your time, man. Look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Let's
Thanks, guys. Look forward to it. Appreciate it.
Yeah.